You're driving home on a Tuesday night. Legal gun owner, concealed carry permit in your wallet. Everything by the book. Cop pulls you over for a broken taillight. You tell him you're armed because your state requires disclosure. Within 30 seconds, his hand is on his weapon, his voice is raised, and you're being ordered out of the car with your hands up while your kids watch from the back seat, crying, confused, terrified that daddy's about to get shot because he followed the law. This is the reality of carrying concealed during a traffic stop in 2026. And if you don't know exactly what to say, exactly when to move, and exactly when to shut your mouth, you are one nervous cop away from becoming another statistic in a system where legal gun owners get treated like active threats every single day. So here's the question nobody wants to answer honestly. What should you actually do when you're pulled over while carrying? Should you tell the cop you're armed or stay silent? Should you reach for your wallet or keep your hands frozen on the wheel? And why does the answer change depending on which state you're driving through, as if constitutional rights are negotiable based on geography? This isn't hypothetical. This isn't fear-mongering. This is happening right now on American highways where responsible gun owners are getting arrested, assaulted, or killed during routine traffic stops because they didn't understand the minefield they were navigating. And if you care about protecting yourself, if you believe Americans deserve clear answers instead of legal double talk that gets people hurt, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel exists to cut through the noise and tell you what actually keeps you alive and out of handcuffs. Drop a comment telling me your state and whether you've ever been pulled over while carrying and what happened. Let's document the reality of how police treat legal gun owners across this country. Now let's break down the survival protocol that could save your life. First, you need to understand something that should make every American's blood boil. Whether you're legally required to tell a cop you're armed during a traffic stop depends entirely on which state you're in. Not on the Constitution, not on the Second Amendment. On arbitrary state laws that treat identical situations completely differently depending on zip codes. As of 2026, you have a mandatory duty to inform officers that you're carrying a concealed weapon in Alaska, Arkansas, California, Washington, D.C., Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, Nebraska, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, and Hawaii County in Hawaii. In these states, if you're carrying with a permit and you don't immediately disclose this to the officer, you are committing a crime. They will cite you for it. They will use your failure to disclose as probable cause to escalate the stop, search your vehicle, and turn a broken taillight into a criminal investigation. But here's the insane part. In every other state, you have no legal obligation to tell the officer anything about the firearm in your vehicle, assuming you're legally allowed to possess it. So we've got a patchwork system where your constitutional rights and your legal obligations shift every time you cross a state border. And somehow we're supposed to pretend this makes sense. Somehow we're supposed to accept that the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and the Second Amendment right to bear arms are interpreted completely differently in Michigan versus Montana, in Texas versus Tennessee. This isn't legal complexity, this is constitutional chaos, and it puts law-abiding gun owners in impossible positions where doing the right thing in one state becomes a crime in another state 50 miles down the road. And the consequences aren't minor. We're talking about citations, arrests, weapon seizures, and in the worst cases, violent confrontations that end with legal gun owners dead because they reached for their permit at the wrong moment in the wrong way. Now let's talk about the passenger gray area that most people don't even know exists. In some duty-to-inform states, the laws are written so poorly that even if you're not driving, even if you're just sitting in the passenger seat, you still have a legal obligation to disclose to the officer that you're carrying a concealed weapon. Some state statutes define being in a vehicle that's pulled over as being stopped under the law, which triggers your duty to inform even though you're not the one being investigated for the traffic violation. So now you've got passengers getting charged with disclosure violations for not volunteering information about weapons they're legally carrying while someone else was speeding. This is the level of absurdity we're dealing with. Laws so vaguely written that prosecutors can twist them to criminalize behavior that has nothing to do with the original violation. And here's something else most people don't realize. When a cop runs your license plate before he even walks up to your window, there's a very good chance he already knows you have a concealed carry permit. These permits are tied to Department of Motor Vehicles records in most states. The officer can see your permit status before he approaches your car. So if you're in a non-duty to inform state and you choose to stay silent about your firearm and the cop already knows you have a carry permit, he's going to wonder why you're not disclosing. He's going to start thinking you're hiding something. He's going to treat you differently. What should have been a quick ticket and release suddenly becomes a suspicious encounter where the officer is now looking for reasons to extend the stop, search your vehicle, or escalate the situation because you acted shady by exercising your constitutional right to remain silent. This is the impossible calculation legal gun owners face every time they get pulled over. Do you disclose and risk escalating the encounter by introducing a weapon into the conversation? Or do you stay silent and risk the cop thinking you're being deceptive when he sees your permit on his computer? There's no perfect answer, and that's by design. The system is built to put you in no-win scenarios where every choice carries risk, and the responsibility for managing that risk falls entirely on you, the citizen, instead of on properly trained law enforcement, who should be able to handle routine traffic stops without treating legal gun owners like enemy combatants. So here's what I recommend if you're carrying with a permit. Keep your driver's license and your concealed carry permit together. Store them in the same place so when the officer asks for your documents, you can hand him both simultaneously along with your proof of insurance and registration. This accomplishes two things. First, it immediately discloses your carry status without you having to say the words, "I have a gun," which can trigger panic responses in nervous cops. Second, it shows you're being cooperative and transparent, which can de-escalate the officer's threat perception. But understand this. The moment you hand over that carry permit, everything changes. The officer's demeanor shifts. His hand might move toward his weapon. His backup officer gets more alert. You've just introduced lethal force into a conversation about a speeding ticket, and there's no taking that back. And what if you're in a non-duty to inform state, and the officer asks you to step out of the vehicle before you've disclosed anything? You need to get out. Pennsylvania v. Mims gives officers broad authority to order you out of your car if they can articulate officer safety concerns. But you absolutely must tell the officer you're armed before you exit that vehicle. Because once you step out, if you're carrying on your person, the officer is going to see it or feel it. And if you didn't disclose beforehand, you've just created a situation where a cop discovers a hidden weapon on someone who was deliberately concealing it from him. That's how people get shot. That's how legal gun owners die on the side of the road because they thought they were protecting their privacy when they should have been protecting their life. Here's another critical point. Never, ever, under any circumstances, say to a cop, "I've got a gun." Those 4 words, delivered wrong, can be interpreted as a threat. Instead, you say calmly and clearly, "Officer, I want you to know I have a valid concealed carry permit and I am armed today. What would you like me to do?" You've disclosed the weapon, you've established your legal status, and you've put the ball in his court. You're not telling him you've got a gun, you're informing him of your permit status and asking for instructions. It's a subtle difference in wording that makes a massive difference in how the officer perceives the threat level of the encounter. Now let's talk about something that dramatically increases the danger. Nighttime traffic stops. When you get pulled over after dark while carrying a concealed weapon, you are in one of the most dangerous situations a legal gun owner can face. Why? Because cops claim they see ghosts in the darkness. Every shadow becomes a threat. Every movement becomes furtive. I've seen officers justify vehicle searches, weapon seizures, and even shootings by claiming they saw furtive movements through a car window at night. Movements that supposedly indicated the driver was reaching for a weapon. And you know what's impossible to disprove? Whether you actually made a furtive movement or whether a nervous cop's adrenaline-soaked brain interpreted your perfectly normal attempt to grab your wallet as a deadly threat. So here's what you do. The moment you get pulled over at night, you turn on your dome light immediately. You illuminate the interior of your vehicle so the officer can see exactly what you're doing as he approaches. This isn't about giving up privacy, this is about survival. You want that cop to see your hands on the steering wheel. You want him to see you're not moving, not reaching, not doing anything that his panicked mind could misinterpret as aggression. Next, you turn off your engine. This might seem trivial, but it matters because it tells the officer you're not about to flee. He doesn't have to worry about you suddenly throwing the car in drive and taking off, which would escalate the encounter into an evading arrest situation. With your dome light on and your engine off, you've sent two clear signals. You're not hiding anything, and you're not running. This puts the officer at ease, which makes him less likely to overreact to anything you say or do during the stop. Remember, the number one thing cops fear during nighttime traffic stops is getting shot. They're trained to expect the worst. They're hyper-vigilant. They're scanning for threats. And if you're carrying a firearm, you need to manage their threat perception just as carefully as you manage your own behavior, because their fear can kill you even if you did nothing wrong. And here's a trap I see people fall into constantly. You go out to dinner, you have a glass of wine with your meal, completely legal, well under any intoxication limit, and then you drive home carrying your concealed weapon. Cop pulls you over for any reason, speeding, lane change, whatever, and the moment he smells alcohol on your breath and discovers you're armed, you're getting arrested for unlawfully carrying a weapon while intoxicated. In many states, any detectable alcohol consumption while carrying can be charged as a crime. You're not drunk, you're not impaired, you had one glass of wine 2 hours ago, doesn't matter. The cop smells alcohol, you're carrying a gun, and now you're spending the night in jail facing both a DWI charge and a weapons charge, and your firearm is getting seized as evidence. This is how responsible gun owners get criminalized for behavior that's perfectly legal when you're not armed. The presence of the weapon transforms ordinary, lawful conduct into arrestable offenses. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that button. Turn on notifications, because we're documenting how the system actually works versus how it's supposed to work, and you need this information to protect yourself. Comment below and tell me if you've ever had a cop overreact during a traffic stop when they found out you were armed. Let's build a database of how often this actually happens. Now let's talk about the single most important rule when you're carrying during a traffic stop. Do not argue with the cops. Guns plus cops plus arguments equals you losing every single time. And I'm not saying this because I think police are always right. I'm saying this because arguing with an armed officer while you're also armed is a recipe for violence that you will not win. When that cop walks up to your window, he's going to ask you the same question every cop asks. Do you know why I stopped you tonight? He's not actually asking for information. He's doing an attitude check. He's figuring out who he's dealing with. Are you going to be cooperative or combative? So you answer calmly, "No, officer, I don't know why you pulled me over, but here's my driver's license, my concealed carry permit, and my proof of insurance." You've given him everything he needs, you've disclosed your carry status, and you've established a cooperative tone without admitting to any violation. But what if he starts asking more questions? What if he's probing, trying to get you to admit to other crimes or provide information that could be used against you? You have a constitutional right to remain silent, and you can invoke it. Officer, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. He might act confused. He might accuse you of playing games. He might get irritated. Do not engage. Do not argue. Do not try to explain your rights to him. You've invoked them clearly, and now you stay quiet. If he continues holding you on the side of the road for an unreasonable amount of time, remember, Rodriguez v. United States says cops can't extend traffic stops beyond what's necessary to handle the original violation. You can ask, "Officer, am I free to leave?" This question is legally significant because it establishes that you're not voluntarily remaining there to chat. You're making it clear you want the encounter to end, and if he refuses to let you go without reasonable suspicion of another crime, He's potentially conducting an illegal detention that can be challenged in court later. If he says you're free to leave, you leave immediately. If he says you're not free to leave, you invoke your right to remain silent and refuse to answer any further questions without an attorney present. And if he orders you out of the car, you comply without resistance. Pennsylvania versus Mims gives officers the authority to order you out if they can articulate officer safety concerns, and I guarantee you, the moment he knows you're armed, he can articulate those concerns. Courts will side with him every time, so you get out slowly, you keep your hands visible, and you follow instructions exactly as given. This isn't cowardice. This is survival. You can challenge the legality of the stop in court later. You cannot challenge it effectively with a bullet in your chest. Here's something that should be burned into every concealed carrier's brain. Never grab for a gun around a cop. This sounds obvious, but people violate this rule constantly because they're trying to be helpful or prove they're one of the good guys. If you tell the officer you're armed and he asks you to hand him the weapon, do not reach for it. Do not move. You keep your hands on the steering wheel and you tell him exactly where the gun is located, and then you ask him to retrieve it himself. Why? Because you don't know the temperament or experience level of that officer or his backup. I've seen backup officers panic and escalate situations into shootings because they couldn't hear what the primary officer was saying to the driver. All that road noise, the distance between the officers, the stress of the situation. The backup cop might not know the primary officer asked you to hand over the gun. All he sees is you reaching toward your waistband, and in his mind, you're drawing on his partner. That's how legal gun owners get killed by cops who are supposedly there to protect and serve. So when the officer asks for your weapon, you calmly say, "Officer, I want to remain safe, and I want you to remain safe. My firearm is located in my center console. I'm going to keep my hands on the steering wheel, and I'd like you to retrieve it yourself if that's okay with you." You've established cooperation, you've prioritized everyone's safety, and you've avoided any movement that could be misinterpreted as a threat. The officer reaches in, secures the weapon, and now the most dangerous part of the encounter is over without anyone getting hurt. Let's talk about another scenario that gets people killed: left-handed carry. If you carry on your left side and the officer approaches your driver's side window, guess what he's going to see when you reach for your wallet? Your firearm, right there, visible as your hand moves toward it. Even if you're reaching past the gun to grab your wallet, even if you have no intention of touching the weapon, that officer sees an armed person making a movement toward their gun, and his training kicks in. He draws, he yells, things escalate instantly. So if you carry on your left side, you better disclose immediately, before you reach for anything, that you're armed and that you need to reach past your weapon to get your wallet. Otherwise, you're creating a split-second decision scenario where a cop has to determine if you're reaching for your gun or your documents, and he's going to assume the worst because that's what keeps him alive. Same thing with your seatbelt. People don't think about this, but when you unbuckle your seatbelt to reach for your wallet, you're making a sudden movement that cops trained to watch for threats are going to notice. I've seen officers overreact to someone simply removing their seatbelt because it looked like they were preparing to exit the vehicle or reach for something. So if you need to unbuckle to access your wallet and you're carrying, you tell the officer first, "Officer, I'm a concealed carry permit holder and I'm armed today. My wallet is in my back pocket and I need to unbuckle my seatbelt to reach it. Is that okay?" You're asking permission. You're explaining every movement before you make it. You're managing the officer's threat perception so he doesn't misinterpret normal behavior as aggression. And for the love of everything holy, do not keep your firearm in your glove box. You see this in movies all the time. Characters casually opening the glove compartment to reveal a handgun. But in real life, this is a death sentence. What do you think happens when the officer asks for your registration and you open the glove box and the first thing he sees is a gun? Things get deadly immediately. He has no idea if you're reaching for documents or drawing a weapon, and by the time he figures it out, someone might already be shot. Your firearm should be on your person or secured somewhere that's not going to be accessed during the normal course of a traffic stop. Center console is marginally better than glove box, but still creates the same problem. If the officer asks you to open it and there's a gun sitting there, you've just created an unnecessary crisis. Everything I'm telling you, every single procedural safeguard, comes down to one principle: move slowly or die quickly. That's the reality of carrying during traffic stops in 2026. You are navigating an encounter where armed police are trained to perceive you as a potential threat, where their fear is justified by training and case law, and where your constitutional rights take a backseat to their survival instincts. I'm not saying this is how it should be. I'm saying this is how it is, and you can either recognize that reality and adapt your behavior accordingly, or you can insist on principle and end up dead or arrested because you moved too fast, spoke too aggressively, or failed to manage the officer's perception of threat. Now, here's a question worth asking. Is getting a concealed carry permit actually worth it? In states with duty to inform laws, that permit becomes a legal obligation to disclose your armed status during every single traffic stop, which transforms routine encounters into high-stakes confrontations where anything can go wrong. But in states like Texas, there's something called the traveling presumption. If you don't have a concealed carry permit and you have a firearm in your vehicle, it's legally presumed you're transporting that weapon from one location to another, maybe from a gun store to your home, maybe from your home to the range. The traveling presumption protects you. You're not required to tell the officer anything about the firearm, and even if the officer discovers it, to charge you with unlawfully carrying a weapon, he'd have to prove criminal intent, that you were doing something with that gun beyond legal transportation. That's a high bar to clear, especially if you've exercised your right to remain silent and given him nothing to work with. So think about the calculation here. With a concealed carry permit in a duty-to-inform state, you're legally required to turn every traffic stop into a conversation about weapons, which escalates officer threat perception and increases the chances of violence or arrest. Without the permit, using the traveling presumption, you stay silent, the gun stays concealed, and you avoid the entire confrontational dynamic because you have no legal obligation to disclose anything. As long as you're not committing another crime, no DWI, no drugs, nothing that gives the officer probable cause to search your vehicle, that gun stays hidden and you drive away without ever having introduced lethal force into a conversation about a broken taillight. Which scenario seems safer to you? I'm not telling you to break the law. I'm telling you to understand the legal frameworks in your state and make informed decisions about what level of risk you're willing to accept, because carrying with a permit comes with obligations that might actually increase your danger during police encounters, while carrying under transportation statutes might give you more legal protection and less obligation to disclose. It's a calculation every gun owner needs to make based on their state's specific laws, their comfort level with police encounters, and their understanding of constitutional protections that are supposed to shield us from unreasonable searches but often fail in practice. Here's the bottom line. The system is rigged against legal gun owners during traffic stops. Your rights are inconsistent across state lines. Police are trained to perceive armed citizens as threats. One wrong word, one sudden movement, one nervous cop can turn a routine stop into a tragedy. And the responsibility for managing all of that, for de-escalating, for moving slowly, for communicating clearly, for not getting shot, falls entirely on you. Not on better police training, not on clearer laws, on you. So if you want to survive these encounters, if you want to avoid arrest or worse, you need to be smarter, calmer, and more strategic than the armed officer who's approaching your window with his hand on his weapon because he just saw on his computer that you have a carry permit. Subscribe to this channel if you're serious about protecting your rights and your life. Hit that button right now, leave a comment telling me your state and your experiences with police while armed, and share this video with every gun owner you know who needs to understand that following the law doesn't protect you if you don't also know how to navigate the human dynamics of police encounters. The law on paper and the law on the street are two completely different things, and the gap between them is filled with legal gun owners who did everything right and still ended up in handcuffs or worse. Don't be another statistic. Educate yourself, move deliberately, speak carefully, and never forget that in 2026, carrying a gun legally while driving isn't a right that's fully protected. It's a risk you're choosing to manage every single time you see those red and blue lights in your rearview mirror.